Hello, hi everyone. Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today we're diving back into our series dedicated to Vietnamese classics with a shot at these deceptively difficult fresh spring rolls. And yes, I really do mean it when I say, god damn it, these things were hard to make. For those unfamiliar, a Vietnamese fresh spring roll at its face value does not appear to be all too complicated. It is essentially a combination of fresh veggies and a couple of proteins wrapped inside of a rice sheet and then served with a peanut dipping sauce. Today we're going to be doing ours with a classic combination of cilantro, mint, cucumber, and carrots accompanied by some shrimp and pork belly. Other common inclusions with this dish might involve things like lettuce and green onion, with some slightly more non-traditional versions using things like avocado, mango, or really whatever else you want to put in one of these things. What makes these so particularly difficult to assemble, however, is that these rice sheets are obnoxiously delicate, which means that rolling these things up without ripping them in half while also wrapping them tightly enough so that they don't just sort of flop over is difficult. So we're going to take a look at something like my 5th and 6th attempts to roll one of these things when I was finally successful, plus the difference between the more traditional nuoc cham dipping sauce that you might often find in restaurants versus the peanut butter based sauce that we're going to assemble here today using good old skippies. Okay, so let's get into it.
Bothers me and I'm feeling unhappy. I just try and think of nice things like let me see, nice things. Daffodils, green meadows, raindrops on roses, whiskers on kittens.
Alright, so kicking things off here first, we're starting off with the raw veggies that are going into our spring roll here, which today will be some julienned carrots and cucumber. Now, for the lazy and or chopping averse folks watching, I have seen plenty of spring rolls done with cucumber and carrot planks, which is a substantially easier chop to do, although for raw veggies, I personally prefer the julienne cut to make our bite a little bit more gentle. In any case, for our carrots, we're peeling and removing the root and stem ends, then starting off with some planks, laying them out on top of each other, and finally following up with our julienne cut. Then for our cucumbers, we're going to do the exact same thing, except first we're going to cut these into quarters so that we may remove the seed membrane here, which is just going to turn into water if we try and julienne that stuff up. Then next up for our fillings, this is going to be 8 ounces of dried vermicelli that I'm rehydrating in some boiling water. Now, vermicelli is fairly accessible in most Asian markets, and really any type of vermicelli will do fine here, but ideally what we're looking for here for our purposes today are these packed blocks of vermicelli rather than the loose bundled noodles, which are more appropriate for noodle bowls and such. These blocks are really useful for us today because they're going to retain that square shape as they hydrate, making them a little bit easier to lay flat in our rice roll later on. Moving on to our sauce next. Now, I know that you all thought that perhaps we skipped these today, but fear not, there is still plenty of garlic and ginger in our dish today. This is 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic up first, which we're going to bloom in the wok before adding to our sauce mixture. Then next, getting to our dipping sauce. Now, as I mentioned earlier, more commonly you might see this dish done with a nuoc cham sauce, which is a type of Vietnamese dipping fish sauce, and if you're looking for one, we did a great version of this in our lemongrass chicken vermicelli recipe here. Today, however, we're doing my personal favorite pairing with a fresh spring roll, which is going to be a sweet and savory peanut dipping sauce, leaning heavily on, you guessed it, some peanut butter. So, going in here first is a baseline of 4 tablespoons of soy sauce and 1 tablespoon of sesame oil to start, followed by 2 tablespoons each of hoisin sauce and sweet chili sauce for a nice complex sweetness to our sauce as well. Then rounding this out is going to be a single tablespoon of rice vinegar for a hint of brightness, and finally the ingredient that we've all been waiting for, this is 4 tablespoons or a quarter cup of peanut butter. Personally, I think that chunky is the only way to go here, but if you're a monster and you don't like peanuts in your peanut butter, I mean, you do you. I'm briefly attempting to mix this up with a spoon before realizing that that peanut butter is way too thick to simply stir to combine, so instead I'm adding about a quarter cup of water to first loosen things up, then switching to a fork so that we may start breaking down that peanut butter until a smooth paste forms. Finally, I'm setting this all aside for a moment while we get to our proteins next, which first up will be our pork belly. We're going to be boiling our pork belly here, so a pairing with some aromatic veggies is going to work out really well for our purposes today. This is 1 inch or about 1 tablespoon of ginger that I'm slicing into strips first, then followed by 4 more cloves of garlic, which I'm similarly crushing and peeling before we head over to the stove. Over on the stove, I have some water coming to a boil in my wok here first, which I failed to film somehow but contains a healthy pinch of kosher salt and sugar here to get things started. This is going to give us some nice flavor to our pork belly, since this is really the only opportunity that we'll have to season our pork belly today. Then going in next is my sliced ginger, crushed garlic, and about 8 ounces or half a pound of pork belly. We're letting this simmer for about 10 minutes or until our pork belly reads 160F internally before removing and setting aside to cool. Next up, moving on to our peanut sauce, I've removed the water from my wok here, then we're reheating as hot as possible, adding 4 tablespoons of peanut oil and, as always, long yao for that nice non-stick surface. Then going in first, as promised, is our second set of minced garlic here, which we're blooming for about 15 seconds until nice and fragrant, before following up with my peanut sauce mixture next. I'm letting this simmer and reduce at medium heat for about 2 minutes, just long enough for that water to cook off that we added earlier, before finally removing this all and setting it aside while we circle back to our pork belly next. Back over on the cutting board, first up I've got my now cooled down pork belly, which I'm slicing into the thinnest strips that I can manage here. Remember that a boiled pork belly is not going to be particularly tender, at least not in the way that a braised pork belly is, so a thin slice is going to be pretty important here. Then finally, the moment that we've all been dreading, let's get to rolling some spring rolls. First up, I've got my rice sheets here, which you'll notice has pleats on one side. This side is meant to face down on your work surface to make it easier to release from the surface when you roll. You don't want this side to be facing up like this, or else when it comes time to roll your spring rolls, that sucker is not coming off of your cutting board, and instead, it's just gonna tear in the center like this. So, pleated side down this time, what you'll want to do is soak these in cold water, not hot water like I'm doing here, because this is just going to overcook the rice sheet, which of course is going to immediately break when you try to roll it as well, like so. Womp. So, pleated side down with cold water this time, we're giving our rice sheets a quick soak, then adding in our vermicelli noodles next, followed by some shrimp. These are some frozen, pre-peeled, deveined, and pre-cooked shrimp, which is, for what it's worth, one of my favorite shortcuts to a dish like this. Then next up is my pork belly, followed by some fresh mint leaves and cilantro, and finally my carrots and cucumbers to round this all out. Then we're rolling this thing up like a burrito, like a very, very delicate burrito, by folding in the sides first, then rolling it over and tucking it in tightly, and finally firmly but very gently pulling everything in one more time. We're setting this down with the open tuck facing downward so that our rice sheets seal shut as they dry. Then finally, last up is some gratuitous time lapse here, because I just want everyone to appreciate that although I did ruin something like the first 5 or 6 of these things that I attempted, I did eventually figure out how to properly roll these and managed to churn out at least another half dozen or so for dinner. Finally, we're serving these up with a healthy serving of our peanut dipping sauce on the side, and we're ready to eat. Alright, so I'll be the first to admit I honestly thought that these spring rolls would be kind of a breeze to cook. I mean, how hard could it possibly be? There are only 2 ingredients that actually require any cooking, one of which we kind of cheated on a little bit. Let me tell you though that this might have been one of the more frustrating things that I have ever attempted on this channel, up there with the spectacular waste of $40 worth of Angus steak that time when I attempted Mongolian beef, not to mention basically everything that I have ever tried to bake. That said though, fresh spring rolls, specifically spring rolls with peanut sauce, has always been one of my absolute favorite dishes in Vietnamese cuisine, so you better believe that I ate all 12 of these, including the half dozen or so that fell apart when I was rolling them. As you can imagine, the majority of our rich and bold flavors come from the peanut dipping sauce, which is genuinely one of my favorite things to eat ever. The sweetness from our hoisin and sweet chili sauce complement the savory qualities from our peanut butter and soy sauce nicely, in a way that's not overwhelmingly sugary, as is often the case with sauces that use straight sugar. Then our spring rolls have a nice chewy bite to them from the rice paper, which gives way to the array of fresh veggies and proteins that we've wrapped inside. Okay, so that's it everyone. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you give this one a shot. For those who are new to the channel, this one is part of a larger series dedicated to classic Vietnamese dishes, so definitely check out that series next if you haven't yet because there's a lot of these. For the Bay Area locals, the Woo Can Cook fried rice pop-up is back at Oakland First Friday tonight, so come by and say hi if you can. More about that at woocancook.com/eats. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share, be nice interneters, and I'll see you soon. Bye.